More news and headlines at the top of the hour. Goodbye for now from BBC News. You're live with me, Maryam, Moshiri, on BBC World News. Russia makes a series of arrests in connection with the explosion on the Kerch Bridge. A group of Russian, Ukrainian and Armenian nationals are detained. Russia's FSB security service says Ukraine was directly involved. Meanwhile, the UN's nuclear watchdog warns power has once again been cut to the Russian-occupied atomic power plant in Zaporizhia, and it's having to rely on backup systems. Well, more volatility on the UK's financial markets as figures suggest the British economy shrank in August. Commemorations in Indonesia and Australia to mark the 20th anniversary of the Bali bombing.
An act of malice and calculated depravity robbed the world of 202 lives. 20 years on, the ache does not dim.
And tributes to Angela Lansbury, star of the long-running TV drama Murder, She Wrote, who's died at the age of 96. In the next half hour, we'll hear from our correspondents in Kiev, Sydney and Kinshasa. Russian state media sources are reporting the arrest of what are described as 8 suspects in connection with the explosion on the Kerch Bridge, which connects Russia to Crimea, the Ukrainian territory it annexed in 2014. The Russian Federal Security Service, also known as the FSB, said 5 Russian citizens and 3 people from Ukraine and Armenia had been detained. It also accused Ukraine's main intelligence directorate of having organised the explosion. Well, Ukraine has not admitted any involvement. Since the bridge explosion, there have been a series of missile strikes in Kiev and other cities. Prosecutors for international mobile justice teams, which include both international and Ukrainian experts, say they are investigating the strikes as war crimes. There have also been more explosions reported on Wednesday in Kherson, Nikopol and Zaporizhia regions. Well, our correspondent in Kiev, Hugo Bachega, updated us on the latest developments over the past few hours. You're live with Maryam, Moshiri, still to come. With Halloween just a few weeks away, we'll show you the record-breaking pumpkin that's already a bit of a monster. Hello, you're live with me, Maryam, Moshiri. A BBC World Service investigation has found that social media giant TikTok is taking up to 70% of donations given through their app to hundreds of displaced families in Syria. The investigation found vulnerable families, including dozens of children, are given access to equipment and accounts by middlemen in order to live stream for hours at a time, begging for digital gifts that can be converted into real money. Well, charities have accused TikTok of violating their own terms and the family's human rights. Hannah Gelbert reports. Halloween. It isn't very far away, I can tell you, and we've got some pictures to share with you now of a truly huge fruit. It was put on show over the weekend near San Francisco, and it weighed in at 2,560 pounds. That's 1,161 kilos, or more than a metric ton. It was grown in Minnesota by Travis Geiger, and he drove it 35 miles to get to the West Coast. Amazing. That's it from me. Stay with us on the BBC. You're live with me, Maryam, Moshiri, on BBC World News. Russia makes a series of arrests in connection with the explosion on the Kerch Bridge. A group of Russian, Ukrainian and Armenian nationals are detained. Russia's security service says Ukraine was directly involved. NATO defence ministers gather in Brussels for talks on how to step up support for Ukraine as Russia escalates its attacks. More bad news for the British economy as it shrank in August and the pound slips again after the Bank of England announces an end to its emergency bond buying. Commemorations in Indonesia and Australia to mark the 20th anniversary of the Bali bombing. In the next half hour, we'll be live in Brussels, Kampala and Buckingham Palace, and we'll hear from our correspondents in Kyiv and Sydney. Well, Russian state media sources are reporting the arrest of what are described as 8 suspects in connection with Saturday's explosion on the Kerch Bridge. The 12-mile-long bridge connects Russia to Crimea, the Ukrainian territory it annexed in 2014. Russian President Vladimir Putin personally opened the structure in 2018. Well, this is the blast and its aftermath. The Russian Federal Security Service says 5 Russian citizens and 3 people from Ukraine and Armenia had been detained. It also accuses Ukraine's main intelligence directorate of having organised the explosion. Ukraine has not admitted any involvement. Well, since the bridge explosion, there have been missile strikes in Kyiv and other cities. Prosecutors for international mobile justice teams, which include both the international and Ukrainian experts, say they are investigating the strikes as war crimes. There have been also more explosions reported on Wednesday in Kherson, Nikopol and Zaporizhia region. Well, our correspondent in Kyiv, Hugo Bachega, updated us on the developments over the past few hours. Let's take you to Myanmar now. Aung San Suu Kyi, the leader of the country who was overthrown in a military coup, is reported to have been sentenced more time in prison. A court is understood to have found her guilty of 2 counts of corruption. Ms Suu Kyi has now been jailed for a total of 26 years, with more charges pending since the military took power. The human rights group Amnesty International said the legal proceedings were a trumped-up sham. Japan's space agency says it sent a self-destruct order to a rocket shortly after it was launched, after discovering an as-yet undiagnosed fault on board. The unmanned Epsilon rocket was taking satellites into orbit. A spokesman said they acted to prevent any risk of damage should the rocket have fallen back to Earth in an uncontrolled manner. The French government has ordered striking workers to return to their jobs at a fuel depot in an attempt to end a strike which has led to shortages and rationing. Unions say they will take legal action to prevent a requisition of staff. 6 of France's 7 oil refineries have been affected by the stoppage. The Democratic Republic of Congo is home to the second largest rainforest in the world, making it an important nation in tackling the climate crisis. But its capital, Kinshasa, is struggling to cope with growing amounts of waste. Local authorities say every day the city produces at least 7,000 tonnes of garbage. Joyce Etutu reports now from Kinshasa. Still to come, a royal date for the diary. Buckingham Palace announces that King Charles will be crowned at Westminster Abbey on Saturday the 6th of May. And we'll be live in Kampala for an update on the Ebola outbreak in Uganda. Hello, you're live with me, Maryam, Moshiri. The Ugandan Health Ministry has confirmed an Ebola patient has died in hospital in the country's capital, Kampala. He was the 19th victim of the current outbreak, which started in the Mubende district in the East African nation in September, and the first to die in the capital. Well, there have been 54 cases confirmed in the country, and 20 people have recovered, including these 5 medics who were discharged from hospital on Tuesday.
I think these are some of the sensitivities that will be being weighed up at the moment. But it's also, as I say, tailored to the monarch. And King Charles, we know, has wanted a slimmed down monarchy. And so in a sense, it makes sense that he might want a slimmed down coronation to really, put forward the kind of reign that he expects to have.
Sarah Campbell, thank you very much indeed. Do stay with us. I'm back in a moment. You're live with me, Maryam Moshiri, on BBC World News. A group of Russian, Ukrainian and Armenian nationals are detained. Russia's FSB security service says Ukraine was directly involved. Iran's judiciary says it's charged more than 100 people in protests that have now entered their fourth week. A BBC investigation finds that social media giant TikTok takes up to 70% of the donations given through their app to displaced families in Syria.
I do hate shoddy work.
And Dame Angela Lansbury, one of the stars of Hollywood's golden age, has died at the age of 96. Russian state media sources are reporting the arrest of what are described as 8 suspects in connection with Saturday's explosion on the Kerch Bridge. The 12-mile-long bridge connects Russia to Crimea. Well, this is the blast as it happened and, of course, the aftermath. The Russian Federal Security Service says 5 Russian citizens and 3 people from Ukraine and Armenia had been detained. It accuses Ukraine's main intelligence directorate of having organised the explosion. Ukraine has not admitted any involvement. Well, since the bridge explosion, there have been missile strikes in Kyiv and other cities. There have also been more explosions reported on Wednesday in Kherson, Nikopol and the Zaporizhzhia region. Well, meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin says his country has nothing to do with the sky-high energy prices that Europeans are facing this winter and blamed the West for stoking a global energy crisis. He's been speaking at an energy forum in Russia. In addition to praising OPEC+, which, of course, last week announced it would slash production in a bid to keep oil prices high, he said Russian oil production is already higher than last year. Stay with us on BBC World News because still to come, Netflix will end the secrecy over its viewing figures as it signs up to the TV ratings agency. Hello, you're live with me, Maryam Moshiri. Netflix will end the secrecy over its viewing figures in the UK. The streaming giant has signed up to the TV ratings agency Barb, which means its audiences will be measured by an external independent body for the first time. Well, the move comes a month before the streaming giant releases an ad-supported subscription tier. Well, let's cross live to Glasgow now. And our technology editor, Zoe Kleinman, is there. And Zoe, why is Netflix deciding to do this now? And before we go, let's leave you with a bit of Halloween. It's not far away, as you know, the 31st of October. And, well, we've got some pictures to share with you now of a truly huge symbol of Halloween. Wow. A fruit, the pumpkin. It was put on show over the weekend near San Francisco, and it weighed in at 2,560 pounds. Now, that is 1,161 kilos, or, for those of you who want this measurement, more than a metric ton. It was grown in Minnesota by a man called Travis Geinger, who drove it 35 hours. Yes, him and the pumpkin must have had lots of really good conversation to the West Coast. His secret, lots of fertilizer and perseverance. Sounds like anything in life, really, doesn't it? That's it from me. You've been watching Live with Maryam Moshiri. Bye-bye.